The Arrogant History of White Ben by Clemence Dane, Chapter 25, Retreat of Ben's Maker. Dawn always broke respectfully on Bothering's little place. It had been rebuilt in Elizabeth's time, and, by some miracle, had been left practically untouched till Bothering and Jenny took hold. With all the money in the world, and Jenny so clever, the restoration was delightful. Lilies and swans reigned in the moat, the lawns were in perfect condition, and Jenny had brought up a derelict Tudor mansion standing on the Liverpool marshes to use in repairs, and so justify Bothering's boast that there was not a brick or beam later than the 17th century in the whole building. Nevertheless, the lighting and the plumbing was as modern as Hollywood, and while carefully cherishing two ghosts, Jenny had eliminated drafts, damp, and creaking woodwork, and had, moreover, reintroduced the use of elbow grease. Most of the rooms were paneled, and all the panels were polished by hand. In one of these paneled rooms, the little girl Ellie had slept for 2 nights. A tenderer woman than Jenny would have put her in a 4-poster with heavy curtains and rings that rattled, or beside a Florentine chest inlaid with an ivory dance of death. But Jenny had no notion that she was inflicting torments. On the night of the bombing, she had very sensibly called in the doctor to give a sleeping draught. And when she looked in late, all was quiet. On the following day, it had been obvious that the child must be left to run about, explore, and settle down. But Jenny had nevertheless borne her in mind, and, after the Swaits' dinner, had come in just as the midnight was striking. Thrifty Jenny had stood for a moment frowning because the light had been left burning. The little girl's eyes were closed. She was lying in the middle of the bed, as if she had tried to creep into it without disturbing the swell of pillows or the smoothness of the sheets. Her cheeks were flushed. She clutched a screw of handkerchief. "Asleep?" asked Jenny, meaning to be kind. The red head was shaken slowly, but the eyes did not open, which irritated Jenny. "Are you all right?" said Jenny sharply, and the head was nodded. "Well, good night," said Jenny, hesitated, stooped, and dabbed awkwardly at the hot cheek. Then, receiving no response, stood a moment frowning. The child was probably extremely unhappy, but what could one do if she wouldn't utter? "Just like poor Nellie," thought Jenny in discomfort. "Well, good night," said Jenny again, and went off, with great cheerfulness. But she turned in the doorway, beginning to say, "Well, you know where I am if you want anything," then hastily changed it to, "You've got your bell, haven't you? Ring if you want anything," and so left her to her second night of exile. But the child, on that second night, there was half a slumber, but no real oblivion. Single images floated before her shut eyes, physical illusions which glowed a few moments and faded away. There was a succession of morning glories, then a vivid picture of White Ben, bright white against bright blue. He came and faded to the sound of crows cawing and the smell of dust and stubble. There were a few thoughts. What was going to happen? How much longer would she have to stay with these horrible people? Mother was dead. She wanted old George. Who would water the morning glories? How long would it be till morning? How long would it be till she was grown up? She was conscious and unconscious, patchily. And at each return to life, the room was a little grayer, a little kinder, until suddenly noises began overhead as if people were moving furniture, and steps hurried past her door. There was a clatter on the terrace below. She could not actually hear voices, but all about her was the sense of the house rousing itself. Her strong curiosity began to overpower her miseries, till at last she whipped out of bed, ran across the room to the window, and opened the casements, which the maid had so carefully shut. A streak of pink ran across the eastern quarter, and the warm, scented twilight was lifting momentarily from shade to shade of light, like the step of a moving staircase, mounting from cog to cog. With every passing minute, the world grew more familiar, more her own world. She craned out of the window. Below, a score of elderly servants were setting out trestle tables on the terrace and lawns. A grumble of deep voices rose, and the shrill, excited twitter of elderly women Suddenly, like a wasp, Jenny Oleron zigzagged in and out of the preparations, and was gone again. Ellie decided to get up. She dragged on her clothes, opened the door, and tiptoed cautiously out into the passage and down the grand staircase, and reached the hall, which was empty and undisturbed. She wandered on and was standing under the palms in the second lobby when a telephone shrilled, and Jenny came racing in, not noticing her, snatching off the receiver. Ellie slid away again. She traversed a long saloon full of books and portraits, whose eyes followed her, passed into a huge green drawing room smelling faintly of smoke, lost herself in a palm court, but so came at last out onto the terrace. The terrace commanded the park, a tableland studded with wonderful chestnuts, oaks, and beeches, each tree an aristocrat dwelling alone. The drive wound to the horizon, then dropped away into an unseen valley. But from the terrace steps, road and grass appeared to collide with the blazing morning sky. As the child stood watching the glory, she noticed, away at the farthest visible point of the road, a black speck. It crawled slowly into being and became a dark, fuzzy-edged body with a solid head and luminous eyes. It advanced, caterpillar fashion, splaying, contracting, and enlarging as it swallowed up the road ahead of it. It was not so unusual a sight, a ragged procession with a car leading it. But it was not yet fully day, and even to a cool observer, the notion might have occurred that the red, flaming dawn was vomiting a dragon, and the little girl's imagination was dangerously inflamed. Her nerves were still naked from the shock of the bombing, the strain of the long day among strangers, of the sleepless night. "She has," complained Jenny to Bothering, "the poise of a woman of 30. But at sight of that ambiguous monster squirming down the road, she was a baby again. She stood a moment, a shaking creature, tears of terror pouring down her cheeks. Then she turned and ran for her life, not into the horrid dark house, but toward the fields, any fields, blundering into the uncaring servants and finding her way by instinct round the back of the building to the stables. She ran on through the outhouses to a row of cottages. A boy's bicycle lay flung down outside one of them. She crashed into it, tumbled, cut her knee, and gravelled her cheekbone and her palms. But blubbering, sobbing, she pulled herself to her feet, caught at the bicycle, righted it, swung her leg over the back wheel, and made off again. The saddle was too high for her, but she could squat on the crossbar, and so she trundled away unseen along the private road into the public lane and on uphill. Her heart was thudding and her throat raw before she reached the gate which led into the woods, whose ways and byways she knew by heart. It was locked, but she tumbled off her machine and left it lying among the knapweeds and the scabious, clambered over the bars, and, with a last fearful look backwards, plunged into more familiar, lesser dangers. In her past life, the woods had been a haunted pleasure because of temptation and the under-gamekeepers. They would have winked at her presence, but she did not know it, and dodged them with cautious cunning. Now, however, driven by a stronger fear, she sped openly down the rides, careless of the noise her feet made on the dried beech leaves, or of the crawling twigs under her feet. But as the ground rose more and more steeply, and the light grew warmer, she slowed a little, for each landmark lessened her panic. Now she was passing the tracks of ground elder, now the open patch of anthills and ragwort, now the wilderness of fallen larches, now the open mossy ride, where the spindleberries grew as high as houses between the May. Then she was in the beechlands again, winding in and round the leaf pits, till of a sudden she reached the top of the hill, facing the northern fields. The morning wind was blowing in her ears, and there was only a mile of footpath between her and home. Lady Pont, making her midday progress along the high road, not quite so briskly as usual because of that fiddling stitch in her side, glanced with a sight at poor Nell's cottage. Then she stopped, cocking her grey head with the caution and dignity of a sheepdog. The gate was swinging. Now who had been prowling about in the night? She hurried across the brief grass frontage, up to the stone steps, and began inspecting the house. Nothing seemed wrong. The windows were all shuttered, front and back doors locked. Nobody had broken in, and no fresh damage had been done to the wrecked garden. Still, she had better complete the round. She marched up the path, crossed the paddock, paused by the broken fence, and saw, somehow without surprise, that behind it, with the Scarecrow's mound for a pillow, lay that poor neglected child Ellie, fast asleep among the morning glories. "But I blame myself," said Bessie Pont, telling the story to Kathy Kingham. "I ought to have gone over yesterday to see her. Bus means well, and he'll provide the finances. But to snatch her away like that, a little wild thing, and frightened out of her wits by the bombing, well, where's the sense of it? Made me angry," said Bessie Pont. "Upset me. However, she'll be all right now," she added with satisfaction. "You'll have to keep her," said Kathy resignedly. It was a statement, not a question. Now I actually remember how Lady Pont's voice is supposed to sound. "Well, of course I shall keep her. She can go to the local schools until we move back to Lucy Street. Dragging a child out by the roots. I won't have it. As if losing a mother in that awful way weren't enough of a shock. They propose to drag her away from every association, everything that's made her life. It's sheer cruelty. Except to a country child, I won't have it, I tell you. And I wonder," added Lady Pont grimly, "how long it will be before Miss Jenny Oleron even finds out that she's gone." "I shan't telephone," said Lady Pont. "At least not till this evening, and when I do, I telephone to Bus." And that is the end of chapter 25.